Tom and Gamer here, bringing you more uh, stories for the week of Remembrance from the book Truce. Chapter 3. All attacks are to be pushed to the extreme. All along the Western Front, the soldiers on both sides now found themselves in a world that had been completely destroyed by machine gun and artillery fire. A British major, Vernon Fleming, discussed that scene around him to his friend Winston Churchill. Imagine a broad belt 10 miles of road and wood, which is all previously littered with the body parts of men, in which farms, villages, and cottages are shapeless heaps of black thin misery, in which fields, roads, and trees are put and torn and twisted by shells, and disfigured by dead horses, cattle, sheep, and goats. In this nightmare landscape, the soldiers were forced to live in narrow, sedgy dirt and roads 4 feet wide and 6 or 7 feet deep. The walls often collapsed easily after bomb explosions shocked the earth loose. During the summer, the sun could make the tight specks as hot as an oven, while in winter a cold, damp wind would freeze fingers and toes. But in the fall of 1914 it was the series of French downpours that made everything a wet, muddy mess. Soldiers, Fleming went on to explain, couldn't crouch in the trenches and coated with mud, unhidden, hollow-eyed with continual strain, unbearable to rely to the listening rain of shells hurled at them from there 3, 4, 5 or more miles away. The sound of artillery seemed to be present with distant echoing, this thuds being followed by massive explosions and firing debris. Often the fire went on day and night, suspending slip and keeping the men on edge, constantly rallying. Exciting felt the trenches were made tight earth to the instant crash and whistle and roar of the sort of projectile. Throughout November and into December, the weather stayed unusually warm and wet. The rain pours intensely from above. Friedrich Nicholas told him firmly in Germany while beneath us. The table had risen just below ground level. Several miles away another German soldier, Karl Erhard, echoed Nicholas' feeling. I must confess this life of shame, swim and mud often fills with revision also the never-ending wet, cold, and physical work. Even when not expecting a bombardment, the men in the trenches had to be extremely cautious both sides, and sharpshooters capable of picking off anyone who showed his hat, even for a split second. In a distant glance came swooping out of the clouds the machine gun men as they scurried to find cover in the tight spaces. There were another dangers the dead humans and animals on the battlefield attracted swarms of hungry rats. Lice and fleas got into the men's clothing and battled and made their lives miserable, while great clouds of black flies nipped at their faces and got into their nostrils. and food. And then there were illnesses and diseases. Conditions in the trenches were so foul and unsanitary that hundreds of thousands of men sickened and died. Between 1914 and 1918, over 6,200,000 men would die in the trenches on the Western Front alone. More than half of them, 3,520,000, died from one disease or another. There was something else that plagued all of the soldiers involved: boredom. Even though both sides' forward lines were in clear view across from the train, no one's man. Soldiers rarely saw the enemy because of the ever-present danger from snipers. Everybody kept their heads down. Days dangled without change in their routine. Soldiers got up each morning, ate breakfast, stood in the trench, and waited, rifle at the ready, in case the enemy decided to change. Because the trenches were so fragile, they needed constant attention and repair, which was always done at night when there was less chance of being spotted by a sniper. Life in the trenches was miserable, but it did have an unpleasant perspective, considering for the men that autumn. The muddy cushion called the shortage of men and ammunition made it impossible for each other side to organize and launch a major battle. For a very brief period in October, the number of soldiers killed each day actually went down. Unfortunately, the commanders of the warring armies shared a hatred for the new situation. They worried that if their men sat around doing nothing, this might lose their fighting edge. Besides, all the commanding officers believed that to win they had to destroy the morale of the opponents. The British infantry regulations said very clearly that a determined and steady advance lowers the fighting spirit of the enemy. Finally, there was a feeling that the set and defended a position was unmanly. One British commander, General William Robertson, observed that the defensive nature of the trench warfare was brought to be obnoxious. Thus, in charge of the armies were determined to push forward at any cost. Retreated German cavalry officer Frederick von Borsardi emphasized the importance of staying on the offense when he wrote, "There is one quality above all in man, which is the utmost importance in all warfare, and the reality benefits the attack exclusively, boldness." This meant sending rampageous parents into no man's land to attack the enemy's trench, even in the face of modern weapons. "All attacks are to be pushed to the extreme," wrote French General Joseph Joffre, with the firm resolution to change the enemy with the bayonet in order to destroy him. But even if the enemy wasn't defeated with driven his trenches, it didn't matter. As another French general, Ferdinand Roch, explained, simply making the charge was important as winning because it kept the enemy nervous. The battle won is one in which one all of us is driven to organize battle, setting our own spirit to the highest degree in order to break that of the enemy. Over 25 miles behind the lines in safety, away from the enemy long-range artillery. The commanders on both sides freely ordered the soldiers over the top in raids that they were doomed before they started. As military historian John Ellis noted, machine guns and rifles must give almost the whole advantage to the defender, but the generals did not acknowledge this. Raids came in two forms. The most common was carried out by an officer, two soldiers in the dead of night, a French soldier, and the arrogant brigand of France recalled climbing out of the trench with two comrades. We subsequently moving on the elbows and knees, of left hands gripping the handle of our bayonets. The man lead had to cut through the many strands of barbed wire they encountered. This was slow work since enemy guards were trained to shoot in the direction of any sound they heard. It might take an hour or longer and cover 100 yards. The main objective of the small raids was to gather information about the enemy, to find out if their trenches were heavily defended or whether they were planning a raid on their own. Sometimes if they get close enough without being detected, the men might lob grenades into the enemy trenches, then hightail it back across no man's land to safety. The bigger raids were designed to drive the enemy from their trenches and could include 30 or more men. These raids required a great deal of planning and preparation, and using their took place during the day. On the day of the raid, the men lined up around the trench, ready to scramble over the prepared whirlwind. Mainly struggled prayers, while others struggled with intense private fears. Even though strictly was ordered, everyone understood that the enemy probably knew a raid was coming. How did they know? First, in order to prove a clear route access to no man's land, the barbed had to be cut days in advance of the raid, and the path marked with white ribbons. Then on the morning of the attack, the artillery would pound away at the sections of the enemy trench. This was about to be swarmed, as one British soldier remarked scarcely. The advertisement of the attack on our front was absurd. Small wonder the machine gun fire was directed with such precision. Every man involved knew that in a matter of minutes he would be out in the open, an easy target for the enemy, while these men brilliantly put themselves in such an inadvertently dangerous situation. As one British officer explained, the honor of the battalion and the devotion of me are now my situation movement in the game of war, which the signal was finally given when climbed up our ladders and went forward. British pilot Alan Thomas recalled, "It was a strange situation walking upright in no man's land, went up until you had only crawled, but I did not feel afraid, or at least not nearly as afraid as I felt internally before going over." The officers tried to keep the men together and moving in the right direction. Difficult thing to do under the circumstances. Private Thomas remembered the noise, the smoke, the smell of gunpowder, the rat-tat of rifle and machine gun fire combined to numbers the senses. I was aware of myself and others going forward, but little else. Onward they went, slipping in mud, trying to avoid tripping over twisted pieces of jagged metal, or falling into long craters. If a man wandered from the ancient route, he could find himself tangled in sharp barbed wire and easy target. I moved past the stumps of trees. A British private would remember, past other things, men past me, carrying other men, some carrying, some, some crying, some cursing, some silent. They were all shadows, and I was no greater than they. Living and dead, all were alike. They were caught up in the sheer moment of the forward rush. Historian John Ellis explained an unthinkable mass pushing forward until they were literally annihilated by the invisible destiny of the opposition fire. While the raids often provide unreliable military information, they rarely succeeded in driving the enemy from the trenches and almost always resulted in staggering casualties. It was not uncommon for half of the attackers forced to either be killed or wounded, and yet another, the, the attack force to be killed or wounded, and yet neither the extreme loss of the fact that little was gained by these raids stopped commandeers from ordering more of them. It was not surprising then that the men visited the raids, as one British soldier told it. How these raids came to be abandoned by those who had to make them, to judge from the appearance in some of the newspapers as well as official commentators, the British soldier longed above all things to be allowed to take part in a raid. If this was indeed the case, he would deserve, especially from his friends. The war dragged along into December, with both sides making numerous raids, and both sides taking heavy losses. Already more than 1 million soldiers had been killed, with many more wounded. Worse still, there was no end to the war in sight. As Valentine Fleming remarked at the time, it was going to be a long war in spite of the fact that on both sides every single man in it wants it stopped at once. The men were exhausted physically and emotionally, and longed for some sort of reason for the fighting. The sense too that to take place. English Lieutenant J.D. Watt felt that strongly something must happen soon. The situation seemed absurd. Two huge armies sitting and watching each other like this. Watt did not know it was, but his wish came true in just a few weeks. Please remember a veteran, and if you see a veteran, go to them and say thank you. If you see a veteran in the streets, buy them a meal, buy them a Happy Meal, and say thank you. And try hiring them. They're out in the streets, they're looking for a job, and they're homeless. Hire them. Yeah, I know they're wearing clothes they've been wearing for weeks, but they fought for your freedom. Please subscribe, and I thank for all the veterans who fought, because if they did not, I would not be allowed to make these YouTube videos. Please comment, rate, and subscribe, and hit the like button.